Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Today I have 3 different cards with you made with one stamp set. I'm going to create 3 different backgrounds. This is called Born to Sparkle. This is brand new from the Joy Claire Stamps Everyday line of stamps. Now there are 2 different lines at Joy Claire. You have your Everyday Stamps, which is for everyday stamping, and then you also have your Color by Faith, which is more faith-based and Bible journaling type of stamp sets. I'm going to be using this stamp set today to create 3 backgrounds for 3 cards. Now, what I love about this set, not only do you get a ton of images, you get these great little sequins in the set. These are great for building backgrounds. Now, if you wanted to, you could stamp these and just color them in. That would be gorgeous. You could heat emboss, watercolor, you name it. But in this stamp set, you have these solid images to fill these in with ink as well if you wanted to. So you don't even need to cut out masks or anything to color these in with inks. You have that option of stamping it in, which is awesome. It makes for some very, very quick stamping. Now for my first card, I'm just stamping directly on an A2 top folding white card base. This measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I am randomly stamping all of these sequins. There are 4 different sizes. You have a circular one. You have more of a circular, but it's got some straight edges in there, a star one, and then is it hexagon? I believe it is a hexagon shape as well. And I am randomly stamping these. Now for these, I am using a black dye ink pad that is waterproof. I switch this up later on and go with my VersaFine Onyx Black, which is more of a pigment ink. It gives me a better impression when I stamp than this ink pad, and I just seem to like it better, and it worked out really well stamping these. But for now, I've got my dye ink pad here, and I am randomly stamping these. Now, if you are recreating this card, you do not have to fill in that center. I just wanted to show you how quick and easy it was to do this entire background, but I'm going to be covering up the center of this card later on. So if you recreate it, skip that center, save yourself some ink, and save yourself some time. I like to stamp a few of the same images before I switch to a different stamp as I get going along. When I first start out, I switch fairly often. Then as I get going, I stamp a few more and a few more of the same image. That way, I don't have to keep switching stamps. I also have all of my stamps loaded onto their own acrylic blocks, which makes for faster stamping. If you don't have acrylic blocks for each and every one of these, if you're a new stamper, just load them up on opposite sides of the acrylic block and just flip them over. You can stamp that way as well. For my next card, I'm going to be drawing some lines to help me stamp. Again, I've got a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white cardstock panel this time, not a full card base. And I am using my Tim Holtz ruler. Use any ruler you have on hand to mark the center of my paper just by going across lengthwise and across horizontally. Then I come in from all 4 corners, so to each corner to corner, and that is going to create these nice, it's a medallion shape is what I'm going for. So you've got this nice star on your paper that's going to allow you to kind of block out these different sequins. Now the first stamp, I'm going to go ahead and start off with the largest circular sequin. I'm going to speed up this process because a lot of this is very repetitive. I'm coming in with the star sequin next, and I am stamping in each one of those little quadrants that I have and just going around. Now you'll notice that each one, they're not all exactly the same size. That's okay. It fills in nicely. And if it is a little off, that's all right. The overall look will still be there. Next up, I'm coming in with that, I believe it's a hexagon. I was never any good at geometry or learning my shapes, but I'm coming in with this next stamp, and I am stamping it on each one of the lines, making sure that the top and bottom points are lined up with that line. Then I'm coming in with the circular and filling in right in between those. Again, these are not the same space. They're not spaced evenly apart, but it does all even out in the end. I promise. It looks a little off now, but once it's all said and done, it'll be nice and even and you won't be able to tell. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to that largest stamp and stamp again directly on each one of the lines. I'm starting off top and bottom, and then I just go kind of clockwise and turn my paper as I go. Now, when I'm like I said before, I'm using a pigment ink. I switched up my inks. I need to be a little bit careful so I don't get any smudges, because this one is going to be a little hard to fix those smudges since I've got so many stamped images so close together. So if you need to, just take your time and make sure that your fingers are clean before you go and touch your paper. I'm going to switch back to that star, and in between each little circular one, I'm going to place a star, making sure that the bottom point is in between each one of the circles. So like I said, this is just very repetitive stamping, turning my paper in a clockwise motion and making sure I get all these as even as possible. Now this is gorgeous as is. You can leave it if you want to. You can go as small or as big as you want to. I'm going to keep filling in though. I'm going back to that hexagon shape. And again, I am going to stamp directly on the lines, making sure the top and bottom points are lined up with the line. Then I'm coming back in with that largest circle and stamping in between each one of those. Now at this point on the sides, you're going to start running out of paper, and that's okay. Just skip those stamping, and I just like to kind of in my mind go, okay, I would stamp here and I would stamp here, and then I'll go on to the next section. That way it doesn't break up my rhythm here and I don't miss any stamps. I'm coming back in with that next smallest circle, and I am stamping in between each hexagon and each large circle, going up slightly. Here you can see I'm running out of space on those sides. I can still fit them in, and I do. They're just hanging off the edge a little bit, and that's okay. That gives it more of a pattern paper look, and I like that. Now I'm coming back in with that largest circle, stamping it again on each one of the lines. I don't have space on the sides, that's okay. I'm just going to stamp 6 this time. Now I'm going to fill in with the star in between each one of those. Again, I'm going to run out of space. I stamp it where I can, but if you can't, that's okay. Just skip it. And I wanted to leave a little bit more white space, so that's where I stopped that background. Now I set that aside and let that dry. I am not going to erase pencil marks right now. It would be a bad idea with VersaFine ink because it is a pigment. You're just going to get very smeared ink if you try and erase right now. Now for my next card, again, I took my ruler and I drew a line from point to point, straight across my card. This is going to create a nice guide line for me. And because this is my first row of stamping, I'm going to stamp in lines now. I'm starting off with that largest circle again. I like to start with this one. It's the biggest. It takes up the most space, and it gives me a nice visual guide. But because this is my first stamp, I went ahead and lined this up right on the edge of my acrylic block to where I can line my acrylic block up with the line that is down. My pencil line lines up with my acrylic block, if you can see through there. And that way I'm going to get each one of these circles in a straight line. It's not going to go all wonky on me. Now later on, I don't have to do this each and every time I stamp, but with this first line, I wanted to make sure I got it nice and straight, and I had that visual guide then. That's going to help me all the way across the card. So if you're going to take any time at all with this specific pattern, take your time on your first line of stamping, your first line or two. So again, I'm going to come in with that VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I am stamping these. I am eyeballing the space between each one of these. If you want it to be perfect, you can always measure. I didn't go that far, but you can do that if you want to and make it even more perfect. I'm going to go ahead and stamp this last one, and again, even if it's just halfway on the paper, I want to make sure and stamp it to finish off that line. Now I'm going to flip this over, and I will be stamping the next line on top of that as well. But in this case, I'm going to go right in between the bottom two so they're not on top of each other. They're spaced accordingly to how the bottom was. So filling in all that white space, if that makes sense. Now I'm going to keep going slow to show you each and every time when I stamp, again, I am lining up the very bottom of my acrylic block with that pencil line. Also, whenever you go and draw in your pencil lines, no matter what pattern you are doing, just make sure that you use a very light touch. You don't want to put any indentions into your paper. You want to keep it nice and light, and just barely draw in that line so only you can see it. This is going to make it a lot easier on you when you go and you erase these later on. Now here you can see my pattern got a little off. That's okay. I just moved over and stamped a few less. You're not going to be able to tell in the end because there will be so many stamps. So now I want to go ahead and take my Tim Holtz ruler. I like this one because I can line up that very dark, you've seen where that arrow was, I can line up that very dark ½ inch mark with my pencil line before. And then I know I've got a ½ inch mark right there where I'm drawing my line. There is no space where this ruler doesn't measure. Some on the top and on the bottom of rulers, they have a little gap of where your measuring actually starts. This does not. It is true to size. So when you put the end of your ruler on this, you know it's going to be the right measurement. That's why I like this ruler. I also like the grid marks on it for purposes like this. I've got 2 evenly spaced rows now, and I can come in with that hexagon and I can come in between each one of those circles that I went and stamped before, and I'm going on each side. Now after those first 2 rows, this is going to go a lot quicker. I'm coming back in with my ruler. I'm lining up at the ½ inch mark again, and I'm going to go ahead and draw another pencil line so I can stamp these stars and make sure I'm still in that line. I'm stamping these stars in between each one of the hexagons. If you get any mistakes stamping, you can go back up and line these up. I didn't bother because by the time this is all done, there are going to be so many stamps on the page, you won't even notice. Now on top of that line, I'm going to come in with the circular stamp and stamp right above the hexagon, making sure I'm slightly above that pencil mark. And again, I'm making sure not to touch my stamps that are still wet. Whenever you use pigment ink, if you go back and you touch, you will smear your ink. You also need to be careful drawing in your lines so your ruler doesn't smear them as well. Now above those circles, I'm coming in with my largest circle. You can see I misstamped there. I'm not going to bother going back and restamping. You won't even notice when it's all said and done. I'm coming in on that other side as well and stamping the largest circle. And then I thought there was a little bit too much white space, so I'm coming in between those right below the largest circle, and I'm stamping that star, making sure the points are facing down towards the stars that I already stamped. So the points kind of line up, you can see there. Coming back in, drawing another ½ inch mark. And I'm going to fill in with that circle where I just thought there was too much white space. This is the smaller circle. I'm going in between each one of those larger circles. Now I'm going to come back in and I'll come back to the hexagon. I'll stamp right on top of that line, making sure the bottom of the hexagon is lined up. I'm going to quit drawing lines at this point since there's so few stamps. I went in with the stars in between each hexagon, and then I did one large circle in each corner, and that is that pattern. Now, like I said before, each one of these sequins has little fillers that you can go in and stamp in some color. Now, this would be really fun to color in with alcohol markers, but I want to make this quick and I want to stamp these. I am using 3 different color palettes for each 3 of my cards. The top row, I am using Nautical Blue, Pear Tart, Dandelion, and Elderberry. Next, Rich Cocoa, Sweet Plum, Rhubarb, Stock, and Potter's Clay. The last one is Rosebud, Grape Jelly, Gray Flannel, and Dandelion again. These are all Memento Dewdrop ink pads. I will link them all down below in the description box if you are watching this on my channel. And if not, you can find these at tons of craft stores online. So I started off with Rosebud on this more just kind of thrown together pattern background that's on the A2 card base. I started off with Rosebud. I'm going to leave the names of each one of the inks down in the bottom left-hand corner if you are curious about what I'm using and you can't see the lettering there. I switched it up to some grape jelly for the hexagons. Then for each one of the smaller circles, I'm coming in with gray flannel. This is just a really nice dark kind of neutral gray. It doesn't have a blue or kind of not a yellow or green undertone. It's just very neutral gray. Then I'm coming in with the dandelion and I am filling in each one of those stars. Now you can look straight through this stamp and line it up. Mine aren't going to be perfect each and every time. Like I said, I'm going for more quick backgrounds here. But if you want to make this perfect, You can line this up. You can also use a stamp positioner if you want to. Now for this particular card, like I said, the center I covered up with a panel. I used watercolor paper, sponged on some picked raspberry and dusty Concord distress ink. Over top of that, I used a few more of the stamps from that set, and I used some black twinkle embossing powder from Wow to create that panel, matted it with black, and then popped it up with some fun foam and double-sided adhesive to finish off that card. Now next, I'm going to go ahead and move on to my medallion background. This is going to be more darker, kind of darker and rich colors for this medallion. I'm starting off with the rhubarb stalk, and I am stamping in each one of those large circles. Again, these are not going to be perfect. If you want them to be perfect, you can look straight through and line up. When I'm making videos, I can't really do that, or all you would see is my hair, my big ponytails most of the time, and that just wouldn't be any good. So I line them up as best I can by looking kind of at an angle. Now next, I'm going in with some sweet plum with each one of those stars, and I am stamping each one of these stars before I move on to the next color. You just want to be careful and make sure that your pigment ink is dry at this point before you start rubbing your hands all over it. If you have any wet ink spots, you can take your heat tool and give it a good dry before you come in if you're nervous about smearing your ink. You can see I have not erased my lines yet. I will do that later on once I know that the ink is really dry, and I let these dry for a good couple hours before I came in with my eraser. Now next up, I'm using Rich Cocoa on the smaller circles, quickly filling in all of those with that color. And I just like to turn my paper as I go. Now I'll finish off that the hexagon shapes with the potter's clay. Now underneath my stamping, you might have seen I have some black fun foam. That's going to help me get the best impression each and every time. If you don't have fun foam, you can use a mouse pad. If you don't have a mouse pad or fun foam, you can use a thick magazine or a thick notebook. That is going to give you a little bit of cushion underneath any hard surface, and it's going to allow you to get the best impression each and every time. Also, not only with your black inks, it's going to help you get really rich color. Now to finish off that card, I used Hello Sentiments, the Thanks from That stamp set, stamped it on some vellum, so I didn't cover up much of the medallion that I created. And I just tucked that around behind, attached the whole thing to an A2 top folding card base, and that card was finished. Now moving on to my last one, I am doing the stripes. I'm starting off with nautical blue, and I am filling in the hexagon shapes. Again, I have not erased my pencil marks on this one. I'm going to let all of these dry for a pretty long time. So as we're watching filling these all in with the different colors, I do want to mention that these would be really fun to cut out and punch a hole in the center and use as sequins on your card, just a flatter version. Now, some of you may be thinking these are way too small to cut out. Well, Joyclair Stamps does have free SVG cutting files if you have an electronic cutting machine. They have free SVG cutting files every time you buy one of their stamp sets, no matter what you buy. If it's this one, you're going to get the SVG download just for buying the stamp set. It's not anything extra. It just comes with your purchase. So if you have an electronic cutting machine, you don't want to cut these all out by hand, that is a great option. Next up, I am doing Dandelion, and I did do the elderberry for each one of the larger circles. Now I'm coming in with Dandelion on the smaller circles and quickly filling those in. I'm stamping off when I go to a lighter color, especially with the Dandelion. I want to stamp off a few times on that scrap paper to make sure I don't get any wonky colors that might have been left over on my stamp. I am cleaning them each time, but just to be sure, I like to stamp off a few times I've done it too many times where I've contaminated colors and then the whole thing's off. Finally, I'm coming in with the star stamp, and this one I'm using Pear Tart, which is a very, very bright, kind of vibrant green. It's almost lime green. I'm filling in each one of those, and then once that was done, I did have to take a break with this particular one and go pick up my daughter from preschool. That's why you've seen a little jump earlier. But once that was completely finished, I just took the Hello Sentiments again, stamped sending on a piece of white cardstock, fussy cut it, put a green mat behind it, then did a strip with prayers on there and did a green strip behind it for a mat, loaded that all onto the panel, and then put everything onto an A2 top folding card base. Now, like I said before, I waited a good 2 hours for these to dry. Then I came in with a very good eraser. You want to make sure that you have a good eraser that's not going to take much pressure to erase those pencil lines, and I erased them all. There's a final look at all three of the backgrounds, and again, I didn't put in how I finished these cards, but I thought this video was long enough. But here is one final look at the finished cards. They're very, very simple and easy to do. That does it for me today. I hope I gave you some more inspiration for the Born to Sparkle stamp set. There are going to be a few links on the left side of your screen you can click on. As always, thank you guys for watching and happy crafting.